In today's news, another traffic fatality, this time on a main thoroughfare here in the capital. Private pharmacies closed their doors today in protest to the government's new price controls. We also get reaction from the government following the action by the Bahamas Pharmacy Association, and the new commercial driver's license requirement is fast approaching. Good evening, Bahamas. I'm Jareno Saunders. This is your JCN Evening News. Thanks for joining us. Police are investigating the country's latest traffic fatality that claimed the life of a male in his early to mid-30s and left 3 females in hospital with various injuries. The incident occurred sometime after 12:40 p.m. this afternoon in the area of Fire Trail Road West when a bronze Honda CR-V driven by a female and a white Suzuki Swift driven by a male with 2 female passengers collided. Chief Superintendent David Lockhart, head of the Police Traffic Division, shared the following details.
Two-car collision. One person was found to be deceased after being examined by EMS personnel. 2 females were transported to hospital by EMS. One female passenger was transported by private vehicle to the hospital. Her condition is unknown. So is the other 2 females' condition are unknown. What we can tell you, our preliminary investigation revealed that the white vehicle that you see behind us was traveling east on Fire Trail Road, and the bronze vehicle was traveling west. The white vehicle attempted to overtake another vehicle that was traveling east, and as a result collided with the bronze vehicle that was traveling west. As a result, all persons involved received serious injuries, and 1 male succumbed to his injuries on scene.
According to police, the deceased and the other 2 occupants of the Suzuki are employed at Tropical Shipping Company and were on their way to deliver packages. Now, although Chief Superintendent Lockhart says he cannot say if the accident is a result of speeding, he did say that the Swift was in the process of overtaking.
As we always say, we ask persons, we encourage persons to travel within posted speed limit. This road, if I am correct, is 30 miles an hour. I don't know, this road is not that long. I don't think there was a need, or there is a need to be overtaken on a road like this. But it is not prohibited. Where he was overtaking is an area that he can overtake. There's broken lines that indicate that he's able. So he was within the constraints of the law in overtaking where there are broken lines. However, I can't tell you if he took into account the other factors when overtaking.
Chief Superintendent Lockhart encourages the public to pay attention when overtaking, obey the speed limits, and do not take any unnecessary risks.
So we are saying to persons, if you are going to overtake, you must take into account the area you're overtaking, and then is it appropriate to overtake at the time? Because you have to take into account the oncoming vehicles if you're able to overtake safely and then get back into your lane. And as always, we encourage people to obey all the rules and regulations of the road.
The investigation into this latest traffic fatality continues. As representatives of every private pharmacy across New Providence descended on the grounds of the office of the Prime Minister this morning with the hopes of getting an audience with the Prime Minister to discuss new control regulations that came into effect today. Private pharmacies across the Bahamas shut their doors today as guided by the Bahamas Pharmaceutical Association President, Shantia McBride. In a letter that was widely circulated on social media on Monday, the BPA is lamenting that the government has yet to respond to the proposals sent to the Minister of Economic Affairs, Senator Michael Halkitis. The group of pharmacists were at the Prime Minister's office from 8 a.m. It was after 10 a.m. when they spoke with the media and still had no response on whether the Prime Minister would meet with them.
We would like the public to know that we are here for you. We're here because these price changes or these profit margin changes affects pharmacy, affects the way we now are able to serve you. And we're trying to serve you better, which is why we ask for consultation with the government to sit down and figure out a way which wholesale, retail, community, institutional pharmacy all across the Bahamas can make it better economically and provide better health care. And at this time, we did close our doors. We did close our doors not to be in breach of the amendment.
Last month, in his national address, Minister of Finance, Prime Minister Philip Davis, announced changes to price control items, including the reduction of the profit margin on price-controlled drugs and other medications. And like the Bahamas Retail Grocers Association, who also had 38 items added to price control, the Bahamas Pharmaceutical Association says there was no consultation between them and the government before the implementation of the new price control regime. President McBride says they have been disappointed with the government since the new amendments to price controls were instituted. She says out of respect, they are asking for a meeting.
Because even to our recommendation, there has not been a response, a receipt of that they received it to then begin negotiation. So we're asking for the public to understand that we're not closing out of greed, out of malice. We're closing to ensure that when we do provide some recommendation or some type of outcome to this amendment, it's beneficial to the public, to the government, and to the nation. From this was instituted, we've never been consulted. So only through our lobbying were we able to meet with Minister Alcides. So it was not on the government's part to say, come and sit down with us. So and then through that, then asking for recommendations that were not, as far as I'm concerned, not read as yet, because it has not been responded to. So on each stage of this, we've been disrespected, we've been bamboozled.
Price control changes were to take effect on October 17th. However, Minister Alcides noted that following a meeting with the retail grocers and pharmacies, the deadline for enforcement was extended to November 1st. Just last week, the association wrote to the Economic Affairs Minister advising that new price control regulations specific to the pharmacy sector were not tenable nor sustainable for the sector to operate for any length of time. President McBride was asked, what is the next step if they get no response for their request for a meeting with the Prime Minister?
We can't afford to be fined today, and based on those margins, we can't afford to close tomorrow. So if those margins are to continue, even if they're saying for 3 months, some of our small pharmacies may close, and we can't have that for big or small pharmacy right now. And if a small pharmacy closes, that's jobs, that's maybe 1 or 2 jobs, but a big pharmacy, that's possibly 10 to 20, wholesaler, much more. So if we don't get a meeting today, I go back to my body, and we then now strategize the way forward from this. I'm sure that up to the midnight hour, we'll still be trying to reach the Prime Minister. So we do not have any plans for tomorrow at this time, other than what was already posted. And soon as we know, soon as the body decides, then we'll let that be known.
In the meantime, the Bahamas Pharmacy Association says it will advise of a reopening date as soon as possible. The association is suggesting to the government that value-added tax and stamp duty on medicines should be eliminated and guarantee that price control officers ensure that these savings are passed along to customers. Well, in response to the decision by the Bahamas Pharmaceutical Association to close its doors, the Ministry of Health and Wellness announced that clinics across the country will be available for the accessibility of pharmaceutical drugs. The Elizabeth Estates and Flamingo Gardens clinics will open from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., Fleming Street Clinic from 9 a.m. to 8 p.m., and South Beach Health Center and Exuma Primary Care Centers from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Family Island residents should visit their community clinics for all pharmaceutical needs as usual. The Public Hospitals Authority also responding by extending hours and expanding staffing capacity to support the public's pharmaceutical needs. The Princess Margaret Hospital remains open from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. to fill outpatient prescriptions and until 10 p.m. with a on-call pharmacists to support emergency requests. Additional pharmacists will be scheduled per shift to provide support as needed. Sandilands Rehabilitation Center has resumed its hours from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. for outpatient prescriptions. On Grand Bahama, 8 Mile Rock Clinic, Freeport Community Clinic, the Hawksbill Clinic, and the Pierce Plaza Clinic will all offer extended hours. The Public Hospital Authority says its supplies management agency will continue to assess inventory levels to ensure it is able to meet the prescription needs across the Bahamas. Well, pharmacies are expected to obey the law in accordance to the Pharmacy Act, and the government does not seem to be willing to budge on its original price control regulation amendments, according to the Minister of Economic Affairs, Michael Halkitis, who spoke with reporters just before a cabinet briefing this morning. Minister Halkitis says the closing of some private pharmaceutical companies following the recommendation by the Bahamas Pharmaceutical Association came unexpectedly as they were reviewing the association's letter of recommendations.
We understand that there is some concern about complete implementation of the amendments. And as you mentioned, there was some concern about people being afraid of the fines. But we want to stress that we expect complete implementation. We are prepared for those who are in the middle of implementation and might need a few days to make sure that they are have completely implemented the amendments. We are prepared to forego enforcement, but we are not prepared to countenance total disregard for the law and taking a stance as if they will not implement at all. We expect them to follow the law.
When it was posed to the Minister of Economic Affairs that the BPA thought the new price control regulations would be on hold until consultation periods came to a completion, he reiterated that the government is within its rights to enforce the new regulations since they were implemented on October 17th, but only agreed to delay enforcement of the new price control regulations until today, November 1st, and it was expected that the pharmacies would have the new prices implemented by today.
We do not expect that there will be a total disregard for the amendment and, a view that this consultation or this negotiation, however it's phrased, will go on forever. Let me remind the public that these amendments were put in place in an effort both in terms of groceries and in terms of pharmaceuticals to bring some relief on a temporary basis. 3 months in the case of pharmaceuticals, 6 months in the case of the grocers. During that time, we would look at working towards methods where we can have a more permanent solution. Having said that, in the case of the pharmaceuticals, out of the 3 months now, we're already 2.5 weeks into that, and we're still having talks about continued consultations.
Speaking on the letter from the Bahamas Pharmaceuticals Associations concerning their recommendations, Minister Halkitis acknowledged that there are some points made in the letter that the government wishes to discuss further. However, he says a lot of the content were concerns over the costs pharmacies have. The minister says they understand inflation affecting everyone, including the everyday Bahamian who the government is trying to help with the new price control regulation amendments, and that it is expected for the amendments and new prices to be implemented. Asked exactly which recommendations made by the BPA the government would like to discuss further, Minister Halkitis said this.
There's some things when you say acquiescing, there's some things that we can discuss. I don't want to discuss our response to them. I want to respond to them, officially. But I would say, and I think the letter's in the public domain, I think the first 3 pages of it was discussing their increased costs and global inflation and those sorts of things. They made 3 recommendations. An interesting one was to assist the government in enforcing the current price control legislation. So that gives us the idea that perhaps the current margins weren't even being inspected, and so definitely the onus is on us to increase our enforcement.
Minister Halkitis says he expects pharmacies to be open today, adding that the term consultation does not mean that the government would halt its agenda. The minister also wanted to reiterate that the price control regulation amendments is only a temporary measure for 3 months, noting that the Bahamas is not unique in having to manage with inflation. In other news, in honor of the May 10, 1980 Cuban fighter jet incident that left 4 Bahamian soldiers dead, The Governor General and Chancellor of the Societies of Honor, Sir Cornelius Smith, along with Prime Minister Philip Davis, held an investiture of national honors on Monday afternoon at the Bahama Convention Center for the Royal Bahamas Defense Force's HMBS Flamingo crewmen. The HMBS Flamingo was attacked after the crewmen approached two Cuban fishing vessels near Ragged Island that appeared to be poaching in Bahamian waters. After the boats were confiscated, two Cuban MiG jet fighters began bombing the Flamingo, which ultimately killed 4 of the men just 6 weeks after the Royal Bahamas Defense Force was officially established. The survivors and families of the victims received medals for bravery as well as the Order of Lignum Vitae. The family of the deceased commodore of the ship, Senior Lieutenant Commander Amos Roll, received the Distinguished Service Medal. Minister of National Security Wayne Monroe says as the country is approaching its 50th year, the government will pay proper homage to the Royal Bahamas Defense Force.
I know that I will hear on Thursday and Friday desires for something much more national, much more appropriate, and I undertake to convey it immediately to the Prime Minister, who sent me there because he knows the connection I have with the Royal Bahamas Defense Force, and he constantly reminds me that the Royal Bahamas Defense Force is an institution created by the Progressive Liberal Party administration, and I'm to take good care of the creation of that administration. And so I will see you on Thursday and Friday, and I will leave it to the Prime Minister at the appropriate time to announce what I've been able to persuade him to do further along these lines.
Prime Minister Philip Davis, during his keynote address, encourages Bahamians to never forget the sacrifices it took to build the nation.
You, the Bahamians honored today, represent a principal part of the foundation of this great nation. You men truly embodied what it meant to serve God and country, and to do so with honor. I applaud the fine work of the National Honors Committee, who's done a remarkable job in organizing this series of investiture ceremonies which have taken throughout the country. While the list of honorees is certainly not exhaustive, it's chosen to represent us at our best. So I'm eternally grateful to all of the award recipients whose sacrifice set a firm foundational standard for us all.
Secretary to the Governor General Jack Thompson notes that this is the government's 5th honors ceremony in the country for the month as they continue to acknowledge all Bahamians that have made an impact. And finally, in this segment, the clock is ticking as the January 1st, 2023 deadline for those who operate commercial vehicles to become certified through the Motor Vehicle Training School in order to be licensed by the Road Traffic Department. And while there are some veterans in the industry that we spoke to here at JCN that are not fond of this new requirement, many companies like Bahamas Waste Management Limited are preparing their staff for the new requirements. Bahamas Waste hosted a ceremony on Friday for its employees who recently passed the certification course. Human Resources Manager Ernestine Seymour told us why Bahamas Waste is not waiting around until January.
We take pride in our driver's accomplishment, and we would like to say how we recognize them for such an excellent group of certified drivers in our company. And as you're aware, Bahamas Waste is the leader in the waste industry, which is why we thought it fitting to take the lead in having our drivers receive the mandatory testing and training. So this is why we wanted our drivers to be the first and the lead in the waste hauling business to have our drivers certified.
The government recently passed legislation requiring all drivers of commercial vehicles to be certified, including tour buses, tractor-trailers, cement trucks, hauling trucks, dump trucks, flatbeds, oil tankers, delivery trucks, and more. We asked Ms. Seymour, what did their employees, many of them who are veterans in the industry, think about having to complete the new training requirements?
Some feedback from our drivers. They're saying that they thought that the course was useful to learn the different parts of the vehicle and to deal with the proper orientation and the state of repair readiness. Another driver states the course helps drivers to learn more about the vehicles and how to prevent unsafe acts and how to make drivers more smarter while on the road. The other was the hazmat class, material handling of transporting class, helped them to be more prepared in hazardous waste material, whether at work or on the road. Yes, we have a female driver. Her name is Donnell Wilson. Her quote was, she was afraid of failing the test, and so she said she has learned a whole lot, and she thought it would make a great difference with her on the street driving.
Operators of commercial vehicles will no longer be able to use their ordinary driver's license, but must have the commercial driver's license or face penalty. Cisco Bahamas, Coca-Cola, and Bahamas Food Services are also among companies that have gotten their employees certified. The new training is based on an international curriculum and involves both practical and theoretical sessions and is expected to help improve overall road safety here in the country. We'll take a break here. We'll be right back after these commercials.